The British government has played a significant role in facilitating Israel's genocidal onslaught against the Palestinian people through its use of its global platform to champion Israel's slaughter, its failure to use its diplomatic position to challenge this crime of historic proportions, its failure to use its relationship with the United States to stop the atrocities being committed on a daily basis, and of course, its arming of this genocide with weapons. Now, today's been announced by the British Foreign Secretary David Lammy that the British government is suspending some arms exports licences to Israel. The operative word here being some, which I'll come on to. That's after a review by the government, which found a clear risk, in inverted quotes, that British arms could be used in serious violations of humanitarian law, specifically relating to the treatment of Palestinian detainees and the supply of aid to Gaza. I should say that the British government has a legal duty, if it has legal advice stating that Israel is committing war crimes against humanity, not to provide arms to enable those war crimes. So it's not like you should go, well, hey, British government, look what they're doing on their own steam. They have a legal obligation not to arm a genocide. Now, what's covered in this includes components for drones, helicopters, and a fighter aircraft. Now, before you start cracking open those champagne bottles, that's 30 arms export licenses which have been suspended out of about 300 arms licenses to Israel. So they've suspended about 10%. And specifically, it excludes components for Israel's F-35 fighters, which are raining down death and destruction on the people of Gaza, with 15% of every F-35 fighter's components being made here in the UK. Now, this genocide has been going on now for 11 months. The new government has been in place now for 2 months. And while any move in this particular direction is welcome, and it is down to pressure that people like you have put on the government, and it is the first time that the British government has essentially officially come out and tacitly accepted that it is likely that Israel is committing war crimes, it is not good enough. Before this announcement, Britain was facilitating genocide. After this announcement, Britain is still facilitating genocide. We should set the bar higher than not facilitating genocide quite as much as before. It's predictably not gone down well with Israel, who nonetheless regard anything but outright cheerleading for its genocidal rampage as unacceptable. A senior Israeli official has told The Telegraph that Israel is furious, boo-hoo-hoo, and called it a reward for Hamas. They'll probably call Keir Starmer Hamas at some point. That's the sort of guys these people are. They say it's a miserable and insensitive decision which comes the same day as we bury hostages executed by Hamas. Well, hostages which would have been rescued if Netanyahu had agreed a peace deal, which he's refused to do because he's determined to continue his genocidal rampage. I'm sorry, Israel, but Palestinian families are burying their dead every single day. Loved ones you slaughtered, including in mass graves, including in unmarked graves. Indeed, thousands who haven't even been able to bury their relatives. Their remains are buried under the rubble or eaten by the starving cats and dogs of Gaza. And in some cases, there's no relatives to bury these people because every single member of particular families have been exterminated. Entire families, every single generation, every single individual eliminated, exterminated, physically liquidated, wiped from the civil registry forever. Let's listen to David Lammy.
Taking office in July, I told this House that this government's priority in the region would be to advance the cause of peace. And this continues to be our mission on every front. In Israel, in the West Bank, in Lebanon, in the Red Sea, and of course in Gaza, where we need an immediate ceasefire, the protection of civilians, the immediate release of all hostages, and more aid getting into Gaza.
Empty, vacuous rhetoric here. The Israelis say only understands actions, not words, and the least we should expect in these circumstances are sanctions against Israel, not constantly looking for mere scraps and platitudes and empty rhetoric.
The Israeli people still living under rocket fire, not only from Hamas, but from other hostile actors explicitly dedicated to Israel's annihilation, fighting an enemy in Hamas whose appalling tactics endanger countless civilian lives. And the innocent Palestinians, tens of thousands killed in the fighting, their numbers growing by the day, including distressing numbers of women and children, many mothers so malnourished they cannot produce milk for their babies, families struggling to keep their children alive, disease and famine looming ever larger.
This is just grotesque. We hear Hamas and indeed other Palestinian armed groups held to account by the Foreign Secretary for their violence, but not a single attempt to hold Israel to account for the far, 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 far graver and deadlier atrocities committed by Israel. Listening to him, you would think that the Palestinian people are simply suffering at the hands of a tragic natural disaster.
Throughout my life, I have been a friend of Israel, a liberal, progressive Zionist who believes in Israel as a democratic state and a homeland for the Jewish people, which has both the right to exist and defend itself. But I believe also that Israel will only exist in safety and security if there is a two-state solution that guarantees the rights of all Israeli citizens and their Palestinian neighbours who have their own inalienable right to self-determination and security.
Well, interesting timing there to call yourself a friend of Israel and to whitewash Israel's reputation as it practices apartheid, which it was doing long before it was committing genocide in the form it's taking place currently in Gaza. A state which subjects so many Palestinians to illegal occupation and illegal land theft for illegal colonisation, as the International Court of Justice, the world's highest court, recently ruled, has no right to call itself democratic. It is no such thing.
And this government is also deeply concerned by credible claims of mistreatment of detainees, which the International Committee of the Red Cross cannot investigate after being denied access to places of detention. Both my predecessor and all our major allies have repeatedly and forcefully raised these concerns with the Israeli government. Regrettably, they have not been addressed satisfactorily.
Let's just be clear here. There is overwhelming evidence of sadistic torture and rape, and countless Palestinian detainees being tortured to death, including doctors. Israeli soldiers were caught on film gang raping a detainee. Even pro-Israel media organisations like CNN and the New York Times have printed overwhelming evidence about Palestinian detainees being raped. We have countless testimonies about the depravity going on in Israeli detention, including thousands of Palestinians who are held without charge, who have done nothing other than being guilty of being Palestinian, and who are being tortured in the most depraved ways possible, including being raped. Where's their mention? Look, I've been clear from the start. The taking of hostages, including by Hamas, is a serious war crime. There was never any justification for war crimes. To only talk in these terms about the war crimes of Hamas and other armed groups, and not to talk about the war crimes being committed by the Israeli state with the complicity of the British government, tells its own story. Now, talking about these claims being merely credible without detailing what they actually are, because this is the point. He talks about the credibility of these allegations, as I suppose that's what they're talking about in detention. There is overwhelming evidence. So if you can condemn Hamas and hold them responsible, why can't you talk in the same terms about Israel? Where is the fiery condemnation of the crimes committed by the Israeli state, for which there is overwhelming evidence? And if you deny them, you're an atrocity denier. But no such thing. Only the fiery condemnation when it comes to Hamas, the far worse war crimes committed by Israel with the British government's complicity. No such thing. Just talking about how that there isn't satisfactory responses to what's going on.
There can be no doubt that Hamas pays not the slightest heed to international humanitarian law. It endangers civilians by embedding itself in the tightly concentrated civilian population and in civilian infrastructure. There is no equivalence between Hamas terrorists and Israel's democratic government, or indeed Iran and their partners and proxies. But to license arms exports to Israel, we must assess their compliance with international humanitarian law, notwithstanding the abhorrence of their opponents' tactics and ideology.
Well, I'm going to be clear. There's no question Hamas has committed war crimes for which there is no justification. Israel has committed far worse war crimes. It is committing genocide. Its leaders openly made clear from the start they had genocidal intentions. So let's not even indulge the Israel has huge moral superiority over Hamas shtick. It is bollocks. Total and utter bollocks.
There can be no doubt that Hamas pays not the slightest heed to international humanitarian law. It endangers civilians by embedding itself in the tightly concentrated civilian population and in civilian infrastructure. There is no equivalence between Hamas terrorists and Israel's democratic government, or indeed Iran and their partners and proxies. But to license arms exports to Israel, we must assess their compliance with international humanitarian law, notwithstanding the abhorrence of their opponents' tactics and ideology. Third, this is not a blanket ban. This is not an arms embargo. It targets around 30, approximately 350 licenses to Israel in total for items which could be used in the current conflict in Gaza.
Well, he makes clear there, no arms embargo in Israel, making it clear that the UK will continue arming a state which is currently responsible for the worst rate of killing since the Rwandan genocide of 1994. The rest, he says, will continue. So it's very clear the UK will keep arming this genocide, just not quite at the same rate. Now, look, Labour came under pressure, not least because it lost support to the Greens and Independents and only won the election because of the Tory collapse and the Reform Party winning support at the expense of the Conservatives. This is not good enough, and we have to renew the pressure on them. It is my view that the British politicians of both main parties are complicit in genocide, and my view is several of them should go to jail. There is no graver crime than genocide, and all those complicit must face justice. That includes members of the current British government and a Prime Minister who used his public constitutional position as leader of the opposition to endorse Israel's right to commit war crimes, which he then tried to gaslight us all into believing that he never believed, helping to provide cover at the most crucial moment at the time in the Western world for Israel's genocide. They're trying to ask cover here, and I honestly think they have one eye on the future given the scale of the crime that has been committed and is being committed. That if they do something, however tokenistic, that one day in their later lives, when they go on holiday somewhere, they won't end up being arrested for the war crimes for which they're complicit. But it's up to us to make sure they face justice for what they have done and what they continue to do. Please like and subscribe. Do leave your comments, your thoughts. Love to hear them as ever. Help keep the show on the road at patreon.com/Unjust84. Listen to us podcast. I'll speak to you soon.